Welcome, Gunrunner.
The glory days of the video game arcade might be a long way behind us, sadly, but they certainly haven't been forgotten, and in this video I'm going to take you back over 40 years to those heady days that played such an important part in our youth. The year is 1980, and we are all present at one of the greatest times in coin-op video game history. You won't find any fruit machines, penny pushers or fixed prize machines here. These are the true arcade classics that lit up dingy smoke-filled rooms, sat on stained carpets, and delighted audiences whilst they drained our pockets of all our spare change. 1980 ushered in a new era for arcade games, where we would start to see a dramatic increase in releases as the huge popularity of the video age began. Not just that though, the early 80s also offered up huge jumps in technology, as well as a huge amount of innovations too. There is a reason that people now call the early 80s arcade era the Golden Age. Names like Sega, Atari, Namco, Taito and Midway have all become synonymous with gaming, and so it'll be no surprise to see them feature heavily in this particular list. This is very much where many of today's popular franchises started, as you'll see once you start ticking off the familiar names on this list. So let's not talk about the year any longer and get to the subject matter, as I present to you the 20 greatest arcade games of 1980. In Cinematronic's excellent Vector arcade game, you get to drive an armoured jeep equipped with a rocket launcher around a maze-like map. The goal of the game is to eliminate all the enemy targets whilst dodging their attacks. The playfield has several barriers that both you and your enemies can use to protect yourself, so you need to keep moving at all times. These enemies come in the form of both tanks and helicopters, with the latter being much less restricted in its movements. Armour attack is a pretty simple concept, but also a very challenging one once you get to the higher levels. For those of you who have never stuck a 10p or 2 in this particular coin-op, I'll give you the basics. The idea is to guide your hot air balloon through a cavernous maze into the exit and then on to the next, more perilous stage. You can move your balloon in every direction, but don't have to keep it in the air as such, like a real one. So if you don't press any controls, it just hovers, rather than decreasing in altitude. However, you'll find that a lot of your movement needs to be absolutely pixel perfect, with some tiny gaps to get through. There's a lot more to Crazy Balloon than its simple looks. Also known as Battle City, Namco's Tank Battalion takes the famous Atari 2600 game Combat and crosses it with Pac-Man. In this old school maze-based shooter, you control a tank that must move around a single screen battlefield, destroying the enemy tanks and protecting your base. The enemy tanks come from the top of the screen, and an eagle icon at the bottom surrounded by a big wall represents said base. To finish the level you must destroy 20 tanks and also stop them from taking out your stronghold. This is definitely one of the best titles released by Namco in their earlier years. One of Nichi Butsu's most successful arcade games, in Crazy Climber the player is attempting to reach the top of 4 skyscrapers. Apparently there are no lifts or stairs because he's scaling the outside of each building, which seems to ire its inhabitants. They will periodically open their windows and chuck stuff at him in order to send him to his death. On later levels, King Kong himself will also appear, trying to smack you back down. Sounds familiar? It should do, because Crazy Climber was the direct inspiration for Nintendo's Donkey Kong, and a true innovator of the platform game genre. Exeter's Targ is a really addictive shoot 'em up set on a 10x10 grid type playfield that remains a pretty original coin-op for its time. Enemies appear on the edges of the playfield and then rush down the streets towards your little vehicle, and all you have to do is blow them away before they ram into you. As the game goes on, the enemies get faster and more lethal, increasing the challenge somewhat. What seems to be very unusual for a game like this is that the enemies don't actually shoot at you, they can only kill you by smashing into you. Targ might not look like much, but looks definitely deceive here. Nichibutsu's Mooncrester is a historically interesting vertically scrolling space shooter that is actually credited as being the main influence behind Namco's Galaga, which arrived a year later. The main gameplay mechanics here are nothing particularly groundbreaking. What is very original though is the way you can upgrade your ship through the first few stages. You start with a single craft that is small and fast, then you dock with another ship that adds 2 extra lasers that makes you larger and easier to hit, and finally you get to dock with a third, even larger ship that adds much more firepower. Although not as well known in the present day, Space Panic is widely credited as being the very first platform game, a genre that is still as popular as ever. Created by Universal, more famously known as the people behind Mr. Do, this coin-op features many of the things that we still associate with the platform games of today, such as ladders, enemies, appealing animated characters, and of course those pixelated platforms. However, what makes this game's claim slightly contentious is that you can't actually jump, something that many Nintendo fanboys will argue disqualifies it, but not for me. In Midway Space Sap, you are controlling a space station far out on the edges of the galaxy. Alien forces have decided that they would like this station for themselves, and have launched an all-out attack. Thankfully you have a laser cannon at your disposal. Problem is there is just the one, and so you'll have to move into position quick enough to take out the enemy. As the levels go on, the enemy ships increase in number, attack from multiple directions, and descend on your station faster and faster. This is a game that really relies on a quick trigger finger if you're going to get that high score. If you haven't played Rally X before, it's a top-down driving game where you steer your little racing car around a maze, trying to collect the flags whilst avoiding the opposition drivers. You have to try and do this without running out of fuel, and a handy map within the side panel shows you the location of all the flags and enemies. This fuel can also be burned to create clouds of smoke that stop the enemy in their tracks for a short time. You obviously have to be careful how much you use though, or you won't have enough left to finish the level. Rally X is a really nice twist on the much used maze genre. Segas Carnival is a shooting gallery game where you control a pistol at the bottom of the screen, moving it left and right to shoot the targets, fairground style. Amongst the fluffy bunnies and cuddly owls that you shoot down are blocks that contain ammo. These must be shot to keep your bullets topped up. On the bottom row are classic yellow ducks that from time to time dive bomb you Galaxian style. If they get to you then you lose both ammo and points. At the top of the screen is a big spinning wheel protected by a shield, and this must be destroyed before you can complete each level. In Ripoff you control a tank on a single screen that is trying to protect a fuel dump. Enemy tanks will zip onto the screen periodically and try to steal your precious fuel, so you need to blast them away before they can get to it. If they manage to grab some of the barrels before you shoot them, then they drop it where they stood. Obviously if they drop it close to the edge of the screen, that makes it easier to grab for the next enemy that turns up. The game only ends when all your fuel has been stolen, so this has become a firm favourite amongst high score chasers over the years. The meteors are coming, and you need to evacuate the city before they strike and wipe everyone out. The shield cannot hold up much longer. The mothership sits above the meteor field with the city below it, and you send out a rescue drone to save the people below, and then you must guide it past the floating rocks and onto one of the 3 landing platforms in the city. Once you land it, you must fly it back to the mothership and dock, then repeat until all the people have been rescued. Lunar Rescue might not be one of Taito's more well-known games from this era, but it's certainly one of my faves. Warlords is without doubt one of the best multiplayer games ever. In many ways it's an evolution of both Pong and Breakout, taking the key bat and ball element and improving on it greatly. On the screen are 4 castles, one in each corner, protected by a wall of bricks. Each player has a small shield that can be moved in a semicircular arc around the outside of the wall. Bouncing around the screen is a fireball which you can either deflect in the direction of your opponents using your shield or catch by holding down the button. The last person with the castle still standing wins the game. Not many people know this, but Phoenix was the first ever video game to feature what we now know as an end of game boss. A new variation on the popular Space Invaders theme, it was quite a few years before this became a standard feature in all shoot 'em ups. The game is made up of several slightly differing stages that end in the mothership battle, and then these repeat, making it harder each time. There's certainly no shortage of single screen space shooters from this era, but Phoenix has to be regarded as one of the very best. It'll keep you reaching for that high score for a long time to come. For those of you who have somehow never played Wizard of War, it's a rather unique maze game where instead of escaping the bad guys, you actually hunt them down and kill them. The game is made up of a series of single screen dungeons where the monsters roam, and you can move from one side of the dungeon to the other via the doors on each side. The object of the game is to simply rid each one of the monsters and become the ultimate warrior. While it looks pretty basic, Wizard of War is actually a rather fiendish and frantic maze-based shooter that still holds up surprisingly well to this very day. In Atari's classic Battlezone, you drive a tank around a 3D wireframe battlefield, taking out the enemy tanks, avoiding their fire, and shooting the UFOs for bonus points. Angular buildings also litter the landscape, which can be used as hiding places, with the iconic exploding volcano and mountains in the background. You have full 360-degree movement and can use the handy scanner to locate the opposition. At the time of release, this early pioneer of the FPS genre was considered to be so realistic that the US Army actually used a modified version of the game to train its own tank battalions. Stern Electronics were an early pioneer of arcade games in North America, and this game proved to be their biggest. Whilst it looks very simple, the fiendish gameplay and digitised speech really made the game come alive. In Berserk, you are trying to escape an enemy stronghold, made up of maze-like rooms with doors that lead into others and electrified walls that kill you on contact. That's not the only danger awaiting you though, as all these rooms are guarded by robots that will release laser fury on you as soon as they see you. Don't hang around too long either, because the evil Otto is always watching. Released by Williams Electronics in 1980, Defender has to rank as one of the greatest arcade games of all time. But aside from its huge sales and many innovations, Eugene Jarvis's work of genius is also notable for being the most influential horizontally scrolling shoot 'em up of all time. In the game, you fly your ship over a planet's surface in both directions, using a handy scanner to show you where the enemies are. Your craft is equipped with a laser weapon and a limited amount of smart bombs that destroy everything on screen when activated. Defender certainly isn't easy, but boy is it rewarding. Certain games need no introduction. Such is the case with Pac-Man. This ever popular maze game has been copied and cloned more than any other game out there. For the uninitiated, in Pac-Man you control the titular character in a maze eating dots until the maze is cleared, before moving on to the next stage. Of course, the game would offer no challenge if it weren't for the presence of those four pesky ghosts, who chase Pac-Man round the maze, making every effort to stop him. But grab one of those power pills and you get to turn the tables. Pac-Man isn't just a groundbreaking arcade game, it's a pop culture phenomenon. Dave Thurer's classic Missile Command has to rank as one of my favourite video games of all time. I have it on pretty much every system I own, and I'll never tire of trying to take down those missiles and save the cities lying helpless below. As great as many of those home versions are, most of them make compromises from the true arcade experience, whether it be the lack of a trackball controller, only using one gun turret instead of three, or making sacrifices to the screen resolution. So this is still the best way to play this classic coin-op, and for me it's undoubtedly the greatest arcade game of 1980. And that rounds up my look at the greatest arcade games of 1980. Are there any others that you can think of that should have made the list? Or do you disagree with any of the entries that I did include? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Before I go though, I must thank all of my loyal patrons for continuing to support my channel and make videos like this possible. However, I must give special thanks to the following patrons in particular for their much appreciated pledges: Mitchell Valentino, Neptune, Seth A. Robinson, Carl Olsen, Thomas Henry, John Byrne, and Electron Star Collapse. If you also want to help support all my creative endeavours, including this YouTube channel, then please go and check out my Patreon right now. You can get access to a host of extra content, including downloads, exclusive videos, creative insights, and much more besides. I've been the Laird, I thank you for watching, and I'll see you all again for another video very soon.